Hello, everybody.
Welcome to NASPA Tonight. I am Josh Greenway.
I am Jackson Smylie.
Let's talk about Scrabble.
This is all you Scrabble news in 25 minutes or less, and the time starts right now. We've got a packed episode today. As always, we have our third controversial topic of the week. This week it is it ethical to phony a lower-rated player when you're already winning the game by 200 points? And this is intentionally phony. Thank you to the 200 of you who participated in the poll and 400 of you, I think, for commenting. Really
amazing feedback, everybody.
So before we get to the ethical conundrum of the week, we have an interview. We have a special guest this week. He should be coming in just a few minutes. I think he's not quite here. He is a renowned Scrabble author. He is a very, very good Scrabble player when he plays Scrabble, and a very, very good friend of mine. So I would like to welcome Kenji Matsumoto, author of Breaking the Game in Words of Wisdom. Welcome, Kenji.
Kenji, can you hear us? Uh-oh, Kenji cannot hear us.
Oh, you can't hear us.
Correct. Well, we'll try to solve that in one second.
Once more.
Technical difficulties.
We've been having some technical difficulties. Sorry for the late start today.
You cut off in the middle of your speech.
So
gotcha.
Let's get Kenji out of there for a second. We're gonna get him back in a second. Hopefully that works. Anyways, we're gonna get Kenji to talk about a bit about this revised Scrabble Player's Handbook. He was on this team. I think he led a team of top Scrabble players who edited a second version of the handbook. And I know a lot of people haven't heard of it, but it's a super popular handbook. It's been downloaded over 100,000 times.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
it's over 100,000 times.
Over 100,000 times.
Yeah, if you're looking to improve your Scrabble game, this is definitely a place to check it out. The Scrabble Player's Handbook, updated now with a bunch of new authors and new articles.
Yes, and then Kenji's also been, he finished some last edits to a couple of his Collins editions of his books. So we also want to talk about his books. Hopefully we'll get Kenji on here to talk about the books himself. But we're going to leave those technical difficulties aside until then. So let's move on.
We're going to try to get Kenji back.
For now, though, we're going to move on to tournament talk.
That's right.
This week, there weren't that many. Actually, this past week, there were a few tournaments, and we did some predictions, as we were wont to do. I think the score right now is 6-3 in my favor.
No, it's more than that.
It's more.
I think it's
7-3 now.
7-3 or... I don't know. We need to do the update to see where we're at.
We're going to come with you with some real numbers sometime. I think it's 7-3.
But the idea of tournament talk is we predict who the winners are going to be each week of big tournaments that are coming up.
And then we forget who picked who.
That's right. So there were 3 last week, and we didn't get any right.
We didn't get a single one right. So,
give us a rundown.
So let's see. Stratford was the first one. Stratford, Ontario. Josh picked Chris Sykes. I picked Ari Sinke. I think that's how you say it. I'm not sure. Ari, if you're there, tell us how to say the last name.
And neither of those guys won.
Schmuck won. He just traipsed in from Toronto. I don't remember.
That was you. You won.
Yeah.
You like to win those one days.
I try my best. I won days.
Okay, what else did we predict?
Second tournament was Bethlehem in Pennsylvania. It's near Philadelphia. Josh picked Edwin Roth. I picked my man,
second.
Joe Petrie.
Petrie did not help you.
Top seed, shocker of the century, Rick Julie cleaned up.
Yep.
So another one, none of us got it right. And the third tournament we were wrong about was Yazoo City in Mississippi. Josh predicted Sid Morale would win. He went chalk. I predicted Erica Haynen would win, but Marlene Milkent beat Sid in the final game to take down the tournament. Congratulations, Marlene Milkent, and everyone who won tournaments this past weekend. So we're going to try to get Kenji on one more time, see how this works. Hopefully the sound is working. So we're going to welcome Mr. Matsumoto. Kenji, can you hear us? All right, we can't hear you.
Yes, we can hear you, but it seems like the connection is going in and out.
Okay.
But for now, it appears to be working. Maybe those in the audience can tell us whether or not they can hear Kenji, that would be great. Would appreciate that. And let's get into it. We wanted to do kind of a mini interview with Kenji, and then he was going to hang out as we talked about this week's controversial topic.
So Kenji, tell us a bit about the Scrabble Player's Handbook and your contribution to it.
So Scrabble Player's Handbook came out about 6 years ago, and it needed editing. It had a different dictionary, it had some different authors, some different references that may not have been wanted. So basically, I rewrote a few chapters. I had some of it updated, and it took a few months, but here we are. We finished it about 2 or 3 months ago, and just been doing some minor editing, and we released it about last month sometime.
Great. So what has the feedback been from people who downloaded it?
I actually don't know. I'm not really in charge of that. So I don't run the website. I just was in charge of the editing portion of it. Ed Okolitz, who's from Australia, one of the players is going to be an Alchemist Cup, but he runs the website part of it. So most of the feedback actually goes to him. Okay. I've actually heard very little in terms of feedback. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Probably a bad thing, but...
Now, I think what we should do is we should also talk about, just in case people don't know who Kenji is, I don't know how many people are like that in the Scrabble world. I think a lot of people know who Kenji is. Kenji is a very, very skilled and accomplished player. Definitely, high-end, expert level, all that stuff, but has spent a lot of time thinking about strategy, spends a lot of his time working towards really providing tools to help people play these games better. And Kenji, can you tell us a little bit about your background with games in general, with Scrabble specifically, and sort of how you come to the role that you sort of fill today, and what about it you enjoy and stuff like that?
Sure. So I started playing Scrabble when I was about 15. I started playing tournaments when I was about 15. Was into all sorts of games. Scrabble was like one of several games that I was definitely into as a kid. My parents had me play game night every week.
Classic.
Basically, though, so I guess I'll start if there's nowhere. The way I got into Scrabble was my parents saw that I wasn't that great at English. So they had me they're trying to teach me English, and started to set my allowance based on how well I was doing during games. So
that leads into a whole prize money incentive conversation. Yeah. But keep going, Kenji.
So the first week, I lost, and I decided that I would
just to bait them into it.
Yeah, well, they were the ones who baited me into this. So, okay. I was already into games at this point and play a lot of like hearts, a lot of gin rummy, a lot of chess. If you told me when I was 10 that I was going to be a Scrabble player, I would have thought you were out of you were out of your mind. But I started reading the Webster's Dictionary. I saw za, which wasn't even a word back then, but that's the dictionary that we played with back then, and just read and wrote down a bunch of words. And then the second, it's 10 cents a point, which is like a 10-year-old is a lot of money. So the second week we played, I won by 164 points. So I won. So
then flash forward a few years, you came second in the North American Championship. So
I also majored in college. I also majored in game theory, which is a subset of economics. So I know a lot about a lot of different games, not just Scrabble.
Cool.
But in in a casual gaming sense.
And I'll just cut in with one more question, then we'll go to Jackson here. What is it that you enjoy about sort of putting these books together? And I know you work with other top experts. You kind of coach and review their games. And I'm just curious, like, as to your motivation, what you get out of that kind of, teaching, coaching, collaboration kind of role. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
I just think Scrabble's a much better game when you actually understand the intricacies of it. I think that as a word game, which is the way that 95% of people play, I think Scrabble's actually kind of boring. I'm not really into the game so much. You just basically go through, alphagramming and solve solutions, and it's a it's a memory link type of thing. I can get into the cognitive science of it, but nobody would want me to do that. Whereas like the strategic elements and like the quantification of spatial elements, the way that you think of Scrabble, not in terms of a word game, but in the way that you think of a game like chess or Go, is just a much, much more interesting game in terms of like how you place tiles and like the fact that it's a 15 by 15 board instead of a 17 by 17 board, and that you can do all of these sorts of things, and that by understanding you can get so much further than you can by sheer blind find the highest scoring play, find the best equity play, find the play with the best lead board combination, etc., etc. It's just so much deeper than that.
You did, like, for some people who don't know, Kenji did a best of 500 series against Quackle once. And this was back when Kenji's word knowledge wasn't even that good. Obviously, Quackle's word knowledge is perfect, and Kenji and Quackle actually split the 500 games, if I recall.
Oh my goodness, that would have taken a long time.
I imagine so. So I think that kind of shows kind of like the strategic depth that you've gone into with Scrabble, the fact that you can beat this, or you can tie this computer engine with not a lot of effort on your part. That was pretty impressive.
I mean, I actually lost by 4 games. I lost.
Oh, you did? Sorry, I thought you tied.
Yeah, I lost 252 to 248. I wasn't very good back then. It was just 2008. So I put a certain number of games on cross tables back then. I could definitely have won the series if I had played 5 years later. I would have won the series, I think, pretty easily.
Right. So for some people that don't know, Kenji is the author of really 2 really, really amazing books on Scrabble strategy. He has both Collins and TWL versions, depending on what dictionary you play. Right now, we'll talk about the TWL versions. I guess it makes the most sense. They are called Breaking the Game and Words of Wisdom. So Kenji, tell us a bit about those books.
So Breaking the Game is mostly about what are the elements of the fundamentals of Scrabble strategy. Basically lead, basic board control, basic endgame, setups, stuff like that.
So what rating range do you suggest Breaking the Game for?
I mean, I don't think it's just for people who are tournament players necessarily. I've actually had a lot of school Scrabble players buy the book. I think that even if you don't play tournaments, that you can definitely gain a lot from that book. And if you do play tournaments, there's a lot of still technical information that I think you would find very useful.
Actually, I remember when I was reading the book, there's this really, really cool section on each individual letter. You did this section on like the A, and then a bit about the B, and so on and so forth. That was really cool. I've heard a lot of people say great things about that chapter.
Yeah, I mean, in chess, we hear about all the time, like people talk about like the bishop and people talk about like the knight, and they break the game down in like those pieces. We don't do that with Scrabble, and I think that's a good sort of exercise that we could start to do. And
we started with the Y and the L. You gotta love the Y, guys.
Well, we should do these episodes where they're brought to you by the letter Y.
This is a good idea.
And then we can talk about the pros and cons. Just basically steal Kenji's content into the show.
So then how about Words of Wisdom?
Words of Wisdom is a much more advanced book. Breaking the Game is probably restricted to people people not in the top division, whereas Words of Wisdom is pretty much all about what the top division is, not necessarily about training them how to do it, but in terms of understanding what top players are thinking and the components that they're trying to consider while making their plays on a strategic level. The big notion that top players are just average players with word knowledge, and to some degree, some of them are definitely that way. But to get to like the top tier of Scrabble, you really have to understand some complex elements of the game that may not be apparent.
I mean, personally, I cannot speak highly enough of these books. I've definitely learned almost everything I know about Scrabble strategy from you, Kenji. We're going to post a link to each of those books. You can buy them both on Amazon. Words of Wisdom, Breaking the Game. Definitely both well worth your while.
And we're also going to post a link to... There's a public link for Scrabble Players Handbook, obviously, right?
Yeah.
So we will post those 3 links
handbook.com.
later on. Absolutely. Okay. So we want to get into our final prediction for Tournament Talk.
Oh yeah, that's right. So
we still have some tournaments. We have one tournament.
Here's the thing.
Next week.
So yeah, we have one tournament that we're predicting, and I am way behind.
I'll give you the first pick, Josh. How about that?
Yeah. So I think I need Kenji's help for this one. So let's bring up the list of players. We'll see if that's readable. This is a tournament that is happening in
Medina, Ohio.
Medina, Ohio. We've got Idelsky, we've got Stock, we've got Kopchak, we've got Feldkamp.
We've got Kaya. So Kenji,
what do you think, Kenji?
Out.
Where's the smart money here? I have a thought. I want to see if you come up with the same thought.
Smart money is always on the highest rated player, especially in this case. So I pick Idelsky.
Great advice, Kenji.
So what I was going to say was I keep getting burned by going chalk. I always pick the top seed, and then they never come through for me. I feel like I'm wondering, is this a tournament that's being run by Dan Stock? Because I feel like he takes home the money in a lot of those tournaments.
Idelsky doesn't play that much.
Okay.
Jason kind of like semi-retired a few years ago. So
yeah. So do you think that helps or hurts the pick?
I mean, it's a one day. It's variance.
So Josh, who's your pick?
All right. It's hard to go against Kenji here. So I'm going to go Idelsky.
Well, I'm going to go as chalk as I can go, and I'm going to go with Dan Stock, organizer extraordinaire.
Yeah, we'll see if this bites me in the ass. But I appreciate that help, Kenji.
We only have one tournament this week for prediction because there just aren't many tournaments this week. It happens. It's September. People go back to school, as I did. So we're going to move on to our controversial topic of the week, our feature story. It is the ethics of phoneying.
Did high schools open this week?
No, middle schools open.
Oh, I see. Gotcha.
Good one.
Okay, so feature story of the week. We put up a poll this week. It's one of our, we're in week 3 of these 8 weeks of controversial topics. And it was an obvious one this week.
Because I was expecting it to be 50-50, but in fact it was like 130 people to maybe 30, if that.
Well, here are the results. Let's pose the question. It was a high-rated player, up by 150 points, playing against a lower-rated player. Is it an ethical play to intentionally phony at the end of the game? Here are the results, 163.
You can see where I voted.
That's
I'm
right.
not ashamed of it. I will stand by my vote.
That's right. Well, we'll do the reveal as to what led to this question in just a little bit. But obviously, there was still, you can see the marker on the left there. This was from my Facebook. And then we've got Jillian and Cesar, who are both on side, saying unethical. Now, there are a bunch of interesting things to deal with this topic. Do you want to cover this first part?
So basically, the most common stance that we heard, and the one that I really support, is that this is situation dependent. Obviously, I posed the question very, very absolutely, it is ethical or it's not, but obviously it depends on the situation. What if you're up by 80 points instead of 150? What if your opponent is your biggest rival? What if it's the North American Championship and all bets are off? You got to win as well as you can. So obviously there's many, many different variables that affect the ethics of the situation. They affect maybe who you're playing. Maybe if you know who you're playing is very pro phonies, they phony a lot, they're super cool with it, then you know it's kosher to do that. I'm sure many people have phonied me for that very reason, and I expect them to. So there's all sorts of factors that will make the situation dependent, and we heard a lot of different comments from you guys, which was cool, about what are these actual factors that make the situation dependent.
And we'll get into some of those comments very briefly, but I want to hear from Kenji. Where do you come down on this? Is there any moderation in sort of the ethical plane of intentional phony bingos on weaker players when you've already won the game?
I wouldn't do it at club. I think that there has to be some sort of benefit. That being said, I was probably one of the first ones to start doing this on a regular basis. So I can't really argue against it. I do wish that tournaments were kind of structured in a different way so that this wasn't a big thing. But given the way that we play tournaments and how important spread is, and given that I think that phoneying is just a necessity of the game, normally the way that we play it with the rule set that we play with, I obviously am going to be very fine with it and have told many, many players to also do this. So it would be a massive hypocrite for me to say anything else.
All right, so that's good. We got Kenji's take on this. What I want to say is that the most interesting thing about asking these questions is everybody gets on there, and some people straight up answer the question, which is great. But lots of people want to change the question, okay? So when this started coming in landslide ethical, I found myself posting this comment, which is ethical the wrong word? Would people change their vote if the word was sportsmanlike or unsportsmanlike? This got a lot of likes on the thread, and I think we would have had a much closer vote if this is what the question was. I had one other example of how people wanted to kind of change the question, and I'm interested. Oh, I have to hit this first. I'm interested to see what people think of this one, which is, this is Mike Kinsell, where he says, listen, speaking as a low-rated player, absolutely ethical. I don't care if I'm down 200 points. It would be on me to challenge or not. And, you know, it's about strategy as well as word knowledge. And if I'm outwitted, good game to my opponent. So I kind of tried to have some fun with Mike and challenged him on this. The point that I was making was that when you put yourself into the equation, it's much different than if you're talking about third party, because all of a sudden you say, hey, I'm totally cool with someone doing this to me. But if you're standing on the outside and you see Kenji, let's say there was some insane circumstance where I had to play Kenji. Yeah. And Kenji's just laying down phony on me. If someone's on the outside, they would be like, God, this is like a cat playing with a mouse. You know what I mean? And maybe they would feel some empathy that they wouldn't feel if they were putting themselves in the situation. So I always find it interesting when people want to change the question.
Yeah, and there's a reason that we phrase the question as we do, because we want to encourage people to think about these marginal situations. Because most questions in reality are not black and white. So Kenji, have you ever been in a situation where kind of like out of pity or out of like consideration for someone's feelings, you sacrificed your own spread and did not phony?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly different cases where you just don't need to do it, I mean, spread is kind of a weird thing in general in that you sometimes need it a lot and sometimes you don't really need it at all. Right. If I don't really need the spread, I'm not going to do it. But, you know, there have been other cases where I've needed the spread, in which case I'm kind of ruthless. But, I mean, it's not, to me, like, it's part of the game. It's the way that we structured the game. And if you want to change that, you need to change the rules or the way that the tournament operates.
So assuming you're in a tournament where spread really matters, let's say, like for whatever reason, spread really matters at a certain point, and you see that your opponent is having a really, really miserable time. Like, is there a point where you would give more consideration to your opponent than for your own spread?
No.
Okay.
So now, here's what I want to bring up at this point, and that's a perfect answer, Kenji. I was going to ask, would you phony me in a game you're up by 200?
You would phony you, I tell you.
I know, he would phony the hell out of me.
I've phoned somebody 6 times before.
Okay, so there's another aspect that I wanted to bring up about this. Is it's one thing to answer a poll online. It's another thing to answer people right up in your face with a camera in their face.
Oh, yeah.
And we have a couple of videos from some people who are willing to talk about this. And I think both of them, well, I'll let the videos speak for themselves, but I'll just remind you to think about, no, we're going to go full screen here. So I'll remind you to think about how someone may take a little bit, Kenji just said ruthless there, right? They may take a little bit of I don't know what the expression, a little bit of velocity off the fastball. I know that's not the expression, but that's what I'm trying to go for here.
So we got a couple of featured
once they had a camera in their face. So let's go to our first video here. Okay.
If you are playing a lower rated opponent and you're up by 200 and then you intentionally play a phony, is that ethically okay, or is that not okay?
It is very ethically okay. That person should know their stuff. A famous person said they know their stuff in an interview.
Who is this person?
Oh, that's a famous lady.
So would you call this lady a strategic lady?
She's a person who, if you don't know your stuff, she will whomp you.
So let me ask you this. High-rated player, right? Intentionally phonies, lower-rated player at the end of the game just to pad spread. You've already said that is an ethical play. Is it a sportsmanlike play?
Not when the amount of differential is so huge. I think at that point the person should have pity and say, to teach that player to go to the machine, play a phony, and then say, look, I've just played a phony, get in the habit of going to the machine.
So our next topic next week is obviously about whether it's ethical to type in the wrong word of the machine, but we're going to think. But
that was the great Glenn Dunlop, who's quite a character in the Toronto and Ontario area here. And obviously, I mean, maybe he didn't even take much off the fastball there. It was more just I changed up the question to get a different look at it. We have one more video to show you here. This is another Ontario player, and he has a little different take on this situation. So let's see what this player has to say.
You know what? I would not go so far as to say that it is morally bankrupt or that it is ethically wrong. I mean, phonies are a part of the game, but my opinion is that if you're doing it because you know that you are either intimidating the lower rated player or that you know that they are just poorly informed, and I just think it's, quite frankly, I just think it's a dick move. Is it morally wrong? Like, I'm going to say, you know, that's a strong call, but is it a jerk thing to do? Yes, that's my opinion.
Is it unsportsmanlike?
I say yes, it's unsportsmanlike. If you're just trying to pad your spread, you know, by taking advantage of a player that you're already destroying, yeah, I think that it's unsportsmanlike.
So that was Jason Hazard from Windsor, Ontario. We met him at the Stratford tournament last weekend. That's where we got the Glenn interview as well. So we want to show a comment from Eric Tran that I thought was pretty interesting. Basically, Eric is saying that it's sort of unsportsmanlike to not try your hardest at any tournament because, in a way, that's a form of collusion. And I thought this was a pretty interesting argument because I think one of the reasons I really support like phonying and like trying to maximize your own spread and everything is that I think it's a really nice atmosphere to create at a tournament when everyone is really cutthroat and trying to win and not giving anyone any breaks. It kind of like, it almost feels like a bit of a respect thing to respect everyone by trying your absolute hardest. Again, very controversial. I understand there's also another sort of respect in the opposite direction, but
there's a counterpoint to that. But I think at this point we should probably reveal what led to this poll. I think that would be worth talking about. So Kenji, I'm sure you know what led to this poll. It had to do with our own Jackson Smylie.
Yeah,
do you want to give your side of the?
I was playing in the Ottawa tournament. I forget what round it was. It was something pretty early. And I was bagging someone. I was bagging a lower rated player, someone near the bottom of the division. And
it was Heidi Robertson.
Okay, I didn't know if you're sharing.
We're going to shout out to Heidi. Okay. She suggested this as a topic for this week.
Thank you for the topic, Heidi. This is a very good discussion you started. So I was completely bagging her. I was just dropping down bingos. It was just dumb. She also got bagged the game before, so I knew she wasn't having a great time in the last two games. Then I got the rack EGHINSU, which makes a phony word of shoeing, SHUEING. This is a word I always see for some reason. I always think, oh, shoeing, that's a word. I always think shoe is a word, but it's not.
But you knew it was a phony.
I recognized, like, oh, this is the rack that I know is a phony. So I wasn't quite 100% sure. It was like, ooh, I still recognize it. But I was like, okay, this is a phony rack. I was pretty sure of it. It played for like 108 points, and I decided to play it. It wasn't a super coherent, lucid decision. I wasn't weighing the ethical considerations like we have been in the last week, but I was obviously aware of my opponent's situation, because part of what goes into the calculation of playing a phony is how your opponent is feeling, because you have to predict how they're going to react. And I find psychologically, when someone is getting bagged, you're sort of in this mindset of getting bagged. And I find that there's almost some sort of compulsion to keep that mindset going, or you're not trying to change that mindset because you're already mired in it. And I was kind of aware of that going on. So I felt that this 108 point phony would just sort of like add to this continuous mindset of being bagged. And I felt ultimately that I would get away with it.
So let's cut to Heidi's side. Yeah. Heidi's in this game. She's getting bagged, meaning Jackson's getting all the good tiles. He's scoring like crazy. And she's like, she sees the phony and she thinks to herself, would this guy, Jackson, who everybody thinks is a nice guy. Kenji, do you think Jackson's a nice guy?
Yes.
Okay. I have I've got my own opinion on this, but Heidi thinks, would he really just phony here and decides, no, he's a nice guy. He's not going to just phony. She makes the wrong decision here and thinks he would have to be like,
well, she didn't just
a real jerk.
I mean, Heidi, probably remember, I think you said you were about to hold, and then you're like, oh, you're not a dick, so you wouldn't do this. I'm not going to challenge. You said it, and I just sort of smiled and drew my tiles. And then after the game, obviously, like it obviously hurt Heidi a lot. It sucks to get that done to you. I felt bad about it for the rest of the tournament. I felt bad about, I mean, again, I still support the action, kind of like in a vacuum. I felt bad about the outcome. But yeah, so I mean, again, we had very different experiences in that game. And yeah.
So that's what led to this question as to being ethical or unethical. And obviously you guys come down on the side of this is an ethical type of action. And thanks very much to Heidi for letting us share that story. And I think it's led to a really interesting topic with lots of engagement on Facebook and all that kind of stuff, which is great. And we've got lots of people watching the show tonight, which is fantastic. So I think that's all really helped us. But there were a number of people who talked about the difference between things being ethical and illegal simply because a action is allowed to be taken. Is it always considered ethical? And actually, Heidi added something that we thought was really interesting in the discussion. And she said, what if the opponent that you were playing that round was your roommate and they were sleeping in? There's no rule that says you have to wake up your opponent so they get to the game on time, where you could just sneak out of the room, let them sleep, take the forfeit, win.
Yeah.
Would we think that's ethical or unethical? I'll let Kenji answer that first.
I'm probably the wrong person to ask that.
You're good with that, right? Let them sleep.
No, I wouldn't let them sleep. I think that there are certain things that fall under the parameter of the game, and I think that that's not one of them. I don't. I think it's different when it's within a certain set of guidelines, i.e. whatever is in the rules or whatever rule set that you've agreed to play.
Yeah, right. I think there's a very big difference between something that's like within the rules and something that's not prohibited in the rules. This is something that is not strictly prohibited in the rules, but it's also not something that is part of the game. It's not in the rules either. So I think there's a very big difference there.
What about buying them drinks the night before?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'll take the drinks. Make me lose, do it.
Please.
It's worth noting that a lot of times, especially in these higher rated versus lower rated scenarios, the value of winning or the value of getting that spread is not even close to proportionate. the higher rated player really can use the spread a lot more than the lower rated player can. So it's not like you're taking an equal amount away. I used to feel bad at the beginning, like when I first started playing, I used to feel bad about doing things to lower rated players that are not just phoneying, but there are other things that you can do that are honestly pretty nasty. But at the end of the day, like if I'm playing, with a high first prize, if I'm playing at nationals, if I'm playing, a one-day shootout where it's an open, like that spread or that extra benefit, that's potentially a lot of money.
Well, I think it's interesting because you're not just talking about your own personal value, like based on like it being a big tournament, but you're talking about the disparity in the value, because if there's someone who's at the bottom of the division playing a tournament, they're a lot less likely to win than you. And so them having a worse spread doesn't affect them as much as it will you not having a good spread.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's from a utilitarian perspective of just maximizing the total goodness, that's a very strong argument.
I also want to point out, we're getting lots of great comments in the feed. We really appreciate you guys. Zev here says that Jackson is very ethical and that phoneying is part of the game. Zev, 100% with Jackson on every
Happy
issue.
New
I
Year
want to
to
point
you,
out.
Zev. Great start to the new year already. I love it. I also want to give a shout out to my mom who said hi earlier in the chat.
To me?
No, I think to me. She said great energy. So say
Come on,
hi
Mom.
to Gabrielle Bauer. Thanks for tuning in.
I want to meet Gabrielle. Okay.
She wants to meet you.
All right. So let's move on to the next section, which is something that you touched on earlier, which is sort of whether our main priority is to encourage a competitive environment, because this feeds into what I tend to think of as is the environment that we want to create for competitive Scrabble. And calling it competitive Scrabble kind of shows that leaning, but is the environment that we want to create the highest level competition, or do we really need to show a split for different types of audiences? And I'm wondering what you think about that, Kenji. Is this sort of emphasis and the way people answer this question, it's all part of the game, cutthroat, ruthless, do we have to? It's ethical. You talked about it as respect between opponents, try and get one over on your opponent. Do you think that that's something that's helpful, if we're talking about newcomers coming into the game per se, or how we want to build the perception of our community and our game?
I'm going to split this into two questions. So on the one hand, the way that things are structured right now, if there's not a good reason to do it, it's not worth it to try to alienate new players on like a personal one-on-one level, in terms of like doing things like phoneying unnecessarily or being hyper competitive when it's not necessary, in let's say a club environment or late in the tournament when neither of you are going to win any money. But on the other hand, I do think strongly that creating that sort of environment is what is best off in terms of trying to grow the game. Any healthy scene has a very high number of people who want to get better. And it's one of the things that drive people to any game or any hobby, whether it's fishing, whether it's, or whether it's sports or whether it's something like Scrabble. I think you're much better off trying to get people who want to get better, want to thrive, want to be competitive on something, and are willing to drive new innovation, new ideas. Those people tend to not only play a lot, they tend to create things that will get other people to play a lot. And that sort of thing fostering competitive spirit between everybody in the community is a good way of getting people to participate more, to care more, to create more ideas, to create more content, and just grow everything in general.
So I feel like this sort of reframes the scope of this ethical question, because it makes it more about not like absolute ethics, because it's obviously situation dependent, but it makes it more about, is intentional phoneying something we should support generally? Is it something we should generally try to get people to understand instead of getting people to stop phoneying? So what do you think about that? How do you think that this question relates to fostering a more competitive environment?
I think that I think there is something to be said that you can get rid of phoneying by changing the rule set. If you want to create an environment where people aren't just necessarily phoneying, then you can change either the challenge rule entirely. You could just change the importance of spread, which is actually what I would probably support of all things. I'm not a big fan of spread at all in terms of tiebreakers.
We're going to get into that in our next segment, so just keep rolling.
Yeah. But I don't really. I wouldn't say that that's one of the things that actually keeps things competitive. I think that there are other aspects of the game that emphasize competitiveness a lot more than the challenge rule does. But I do think competitiveness is important, and I think the idea that people can use the challenge rule isn't entirely a bad thing, but that a lot of times it's just used to spite new players or to spite players that we want to actually keep coming back.
I agree. I think that is an important consideration when someone is a new player. You definitely want to be welcoming and inclusive because when it's your first experience in a tournament, people are often very nervous and don't really know what to expect. So it's always good to have a first positive experience in something.
We also wanted to talk about I think we've kind of touched on this already, the idea, I think both of you have made comments about this, that, the general ethics of games are games contain certain rules. Any basic action that falls within those rules is basically ethical. And that games are basically, there's a mutual understanding between opponents of what's expected. At least that's sort of inherent, like this is the game, it's a competitive game, there's one winner, there's one loser, and sort of anything goes on that board, outside of cheating or something like that.
Again, we agree on rules that we stipulate. Yeah.
That's right. So I think that is something that we've kind of covered already. Obviously there are two parts to NASPA's motto in particular, make words, build friendships. And it's something...
Make good strategic decisions, Kenji. You should make that the third motive, NASPA.
What's the third part?
Make good strategic decisions.
Oh,
which you can find words of wisdom in making the game.
I mean, I'm not big on the making friendships part of it. It's like a motto. Like that just isn't... I'm not big on that.
Very offended.
Right. So this is somewhere that we probably differ on this particular approach. I think we both have the same goal in mind, that we want lots more people playing competitive Scrabble. I think we agree on that. But I'm a big fan of that aspect of the game, and I think it's one of the things that makes our game sticky, along with things like rating systems and giving away cash prizes and stuff like that. I think that helps people come back as well. So I see values to both sides of those coins. I don't know where you come down on that, Jackson.
I'm just reading Sean Bassi's comment right now that I'm supposed to be the role model of the future of Scrabble. Yeah, I feel like I'm a traitor to the school Scrabble scene because I'm all into the competitive nature of Scrabble instead of the wholesome nature. So I dearly appreciate Vera Biggle and all of her efforts in school Scrabble, even though my mentality has since departed from the wholesome, no dirty words attitude.
I think it's important to create a good social scene. I just don't think that should be... I don't think that many of the things that you suggest are things that do that on an even playing field, and that you should structure tournaments around socialness necessarily as much as you should be emphasizing the game, because if you don't enjoy the game, then the fact that there's a socialness doesn't matter.
Josh does not like the game of Scrabble. We all know that. He doesn't like playing it.
Well, yeah, but I like Scrabble people. I like being around Scrabble people.
But you host a show called NASPA Tonight, Josh. Like you're hosting a Scrabble show.
It's not called Scrabble Tonight. It's called NASPA Tonight.
But essentially, that's what it is. It's the national... it's Scrabble Players Association. Like if you don't create an environment where the game isn't important, what are you doing with your time?
Here's the strategy is that you lure people in with this exciting game of Scrabble, and then they stay for the social aspect. So we're actually in the process. I'm going to run a tournament just for Josh on his birthday or something. It's going to be a 0-game tournament. No prizes, no entry fee, no money moving up between divisions. It's just actually going to be at a restaurant. It's just going to be a big lunch.
No, ultimately, let me answer Kenji's question. It's not like I hate Scrabble. Like, I've played a lot of games. I've played more games than this guy has, although he's like pretty young. So I've played 1,500 games. I've crisscrossed the country playing in games, winning the odd tournament, all that kind of stuff, and have had those kinds of highs and lows. So there is something to this game that I enjoy. But have I spent time putting in my 10,000 hours? No, I haven't, to try to really improve. Now, that comes down to prioritization more than anything else. So, I don't know. I mean, it's, I don't know. I do love Scrabble, but I probably love Scrabble people more than the actual game itself. Yeah. And I have just as much fun working nationals and working on some different things, like doing this show.
Well, I think it's important. I think it's good at people like you.
That's right. But look at Kenji. Kenji is not playing tons of tournaments, but he's putting out tons of great content and helping people get better at this game.
Yeah,
Kenji, there are different ways for us to be able to contribute, I think.
Yeah. Also, I think the question what Kenji was talking about is more about like when we're trying to promote Scrabble, is the way to do that by advertising the people or advertising the game? It kind of makes sense to draw people in through the game.
Yeah. Initially. Also, I want to throw some props to Kenji. I tend to get a lot of credit for being sort of, to some degree the face of some of NASPA's social media efforts and doing stuff like coverage of the nationals and stuff. Kenji and I have been talking about this nonstop for basically 2 years, and Kenji's been a huge contributor to that and has been super helpful to that. So I just wanted to throw my props there to you, Kenji, because I think that you've got skills, thoughts, all kinds of stuff to contribute to this game.
So we've got So we have some birthdays.
Well, hold on.
That's part of the show.
No. There's one more piece of this, which is, should spread be the first tiebreaker? Now, we got an email from one of our very big fans. I don't want to identify who the fan is, but their initials are CC. So we got this email. I think, did you get this email this week? Okay, well, you were copied on it, so you must not be checking your emails. That also goes from last AB meeting, which you totally slept through. And
as here's most young people at AB meetings. We don't feel listened to.
Come on, that is all right. That is unnecessarily mean there, Kenji. So here's what I'm gonna summarize the email. That's the important part. That's the point that I'm making. Is if we take a look at Stratford, where we both played, you won the event, and it was like saying, okay, you won the event based on spread, correct? Yeah, you had the same record as somebody else. And it was like, okay, the first tiebreaker is spread. That's how it broke down. You won the tournament.
Yeah.
Another way to put that in this particular situation is who blew out the bottom seed of that division by more points. And in one case, your opponent who lost on spread beat the bottom seed by 30. You beat the bottom seed by 370. Which more than covered your winning margin.
For what it's worth, I didn't play a single phony in that game.
I haven't finished my question. So, is how badly you destroy the bottom seed in a division the best tiebreaker? And are there other tiebreakers we can consider? People have thrown out the notion of performance rating and head-to-head record. I want to hear Kenji on this, and I want to hear you on this.
I hate both of those too.
What do you support?
I support, in general, I don't think you need a tiebreaker outside of first. If people tie for third, I am generally just split the prize money. I'm perfectly happy with that. There's no reason to need a tiebreaker for third.
Okay, that's interesting.
The tiebreaker for first is just, you can, if it's really important, then you just have some sort of modified game of some sort. A lot of times prize ceremonies run really late, so you can run some shortened version of a game. There are different restraints that you can do to come up. You can have the first 5 turns. You can have a 10-minute game or something like that. there are only so many restrictions during this entire thing, and you can run the entire prize ceremony or whatever while this entire thing is happening because you have everything all structured already. So that's my preferred method. I don't really, I don't really see the need for having a tiebreaker where it needs to be off some sort of technicality, especially since that can get really convoluted and people can start making plans around that, which may not be enjoyed by, or may not be good for the community in general.
I think that's a really unique take that we haven't heard before. I really like the way you separate first and third, so I think that's really cool. Jackson, did you have a thought about this before we close off the feature story here?
I don't have a strong opinion. I'm not a big fan of spread either. It's kind of annoying to play for spread, and it gets into all these ethical situations. I don't have a strong opinion. I think there's a lot of different reasonable alternatives. Depends on the tournament. If you can afford to have a finals, like an extra game as a finals, I think that's ideal. But not every tournament has that sort of time at their hands. But I love playoffs, as you will have heard 2 weeks ago.
Right. Okay. So I want to say we're going to move to Scrabble birthdays, but first I want to close with Kenji here. Thank you so much for taking the time tonight. I think you added a lot to this discussion. I'm really happy with this discussion. It wasn't quite, I think we try to make this as fun as possible, but I think we went pretty deep on this discussion. Like, I'm pretty happy with where we ended up. How about you?
Yeah.
Okay, Kenji, we really appreciate it. Thanks for being on the show. And all right, we'll talk to you soon. Let's move to Scrabble birthdays.
What you've all been waiting for.
That's right. Well, no, we have some interesting content here. Don't hang up just yet. So here's what I'm going to say. We love you all. We love you watching. We love you commenting. Like this, share this, all that stuff. It helps all the time. Yeah, we don't need these anymore. And we especially love our birthday people who are tuning in. Like, as soon as we put those birthdays up, 3 of those people jumped in there. So I want to say happy birthday to Colton, to Andre Popadinik, to Alan Stern, who coined Make Words, Build Friendships. I love that. Connie Creed, Olinda Flissock, Kevin Ing, who was briefly our Player of the Year.
Oh, yeah.
That whole deal. Jim Brennan, Ida Scaglione, and Seth Lipkin. And Seth Lipkin's birthday today. I hope Seth is still watching. I want to wish that guy happy birthday. He's a former Person of the Year for NASPA.
Really?
Well, are you kidding me?
Well deserved. What would we do with our cross tables? We would be.
How about cross tables? How about Ulu?
Oh my
How about this is a guy who hit 2,000 while maintaining what appears to be a happy family and children. Like, almost everybody who hits 2,000 are single in a basement who can spend all this time getting to 2,000. So this is a guy who has achieved a hell of a lot. And I want to share with people something that is kind of cool that you may not know about this. There is a Seth Lipkin fan club that you can join on Cross Tables. You can see that Jackson and I are both members. Today is the day where we really want to make some posts. So I think I'm going to share this broadcast to that group. But definitely, if you're a Seth Lipkin fan, search on Facebook for Seth Lipkin Fan Club and then request to join the group. It's a lot of fun. And you can see exclusive content like this. This was Seth. I think this might have been at the Musicale one year at Nationals, where he was just lying on the floor Googling something or something like that. And people, when they see Seth, they take pictures of him and then they post it to the fan club because everyone wants to know what Seth is up to. So big mega props to Seth Lipkin. And I think this has been a pretty good show.
Pretty good. Next week, we don't even know what the topic is yet, but you'll find out on Friday. We'll post another poll.
That's right.
Comment 400 times, 500 this time, and we'll crack it. Yeah, thanks a lot for tuning in. Thanks a lot for Kenji. We're going to post the links to Breaking the Game, Words of Wisdom, and Scrabble Player's Handbook
That will exist. That will exist on the Facebook post where you see this video. But also, when we get around to posting this to YouTube, it'll also be in the description underneath. But definitely, you can probably just search Scrabble Player's Handbook.
Absolutely.
Just Google that stuff, and it'll come up. And
yeah. To no one's surprise, we are well over time.
Whoa!
Gonna stop the clock.
That is
no one saw the time there.
That is a long episode. Thanks for those of you who stuck with us. We are very appreciative, and we will be back.
See you next Tuesday.
Oh, and play Scrabble. Support your local directors. They're doing God's work. Okay.
Have a good day.
Goodbye, everybody.